So hello, everyone. I'm going to start now, and Grace will just carry on letting some people into the room. Thank you so much for joining us today for our first live talk session of the year in partnership with Attitude Is Everything on breaking down barriers for disabled people in the music industry. For those of you who haven't joined the live talks before, welcome. My name is Gabby. I'm head of partnerships at Live, which is the voice of the UK's live music and entertainment business. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white female with brown eyes, blondish hair, and I'm wearing a brown jumper with gold jewelry and gold rimmed glasses. If you've not been to one of our sessions before, the Live Talks programme is a series of online workshops and talks which focus on equality, diversity and inclusion, sustainability and wellbeing. They're also free to access for everybody in the hope that we can make positive changes across our industry. I just need to do a little bit of housekeeping before we start. Please feel free to keep your camera turned off and change your Zoom name to anonymous if you prefer, but it's always great to see lots of faces in the room. Please make sure your mic is muted throughout to avoid interference. And if we have some time left at the end, we'll open up the floor to questions, but please also put questions into the chat if you have any throughout, and we'll try and flag those. A recording of today's session will be made available via the Live website, which I'll put a link into the chat in a minute. And that's it from me. So over to you, Dominique.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's staying warm and cozy today. We've already had lots of chats about how freezing it is wherever you are. My name is Dominique. My pronouns are they, she. I am a white non-binary creature, currently with red curly hair, glasses, and a black pashmina, otherwise known as a sweater blanket. I am so glad to have everyone in the room today. I can see some people who have already attended some of our trainings, so really nice to see those faces and names again. Always like a little bit of familiarity. I am going to jump straight into it because we've only got a little bit of time today, and I'm going to really hope that my tech is kind to me. So let's get into it. Can everyone see presentation? Can I get a yes?
Yeah.
Someone? Amazing. Thank you so much. Fab. So we are here today primarily to talk about language, but let me just do a quick overview for those of you that don't know. Again, I'm the training manager at Attitude Is Everything. So everything training, that's all me. Attitude Is Everything is a charity that works with events and music industries to help them to be as accessible as they can be for deaf and disabled people. We do this through our Charter of Best Practice, which is a tool for assessing, supporting, and approving access across a venue or a festival. We also have Beyond the Music, which is a really cool program that helps us to work with professionals and aspiring industry leaders. We have our State of Access reports, which gets into the nitty-gritty of our research. Next Stage is also a research project that looks at artists with disabilities and their experience of working in the music industry. And we're also working on providing a ton of different resources as well that I will share with you at the end of the session today. So, a little bit of preamble. I have to give you the information before we can get into the fun bits, well, what I think are the fun bits. Our training and our organizational ethos is always led by the social model of disability. There are currently 3 main models with really a 4th that's on the horizon, but in the interest of time today, we're going to be looking at the 2 main and most really opposing models of disability. And the reason that we do this is because they ultimately inform the way that we observe and the way that we interact with the world around us. So the medical model, super dry, but it's also been referred to as a pathology paradigm. And this states that disability is defined by an individual's medical condition, and that obviously affects their ability to carry out tasks. And the way to resolve a disability under the medical model is to treat or to cure the condition in order to bring about equal access. So it says that if you can be cured, then you can once again access society. So if a disabled person cannot be cured, then the best thing to do is remove them from society and to place them in an institution, which is, of course, supposedly for their own good. And this might sound alarming to some people, but historically, we did see this happen. You know, throughout the 20th century, many disabled people, especially those with mental health or learning impairments, but also a lot of people with physical impairments were placed into institutions at a very young age, where they spent most of their lives. It was really only in the 1980s that this policy started to become reversed. So again, under that medical model, if a disabled person wanted to access a gig that was up a flight of stairs, then the medical model solution would be 6 months of intensive physio until they could potentially climb the stairs, if they could climb them at all. And if not, then they can't go to the gig. And we believe that joy is one of those basic tenets of life, and music is joy. It's worth being aware that the idea of a cure is a very contentious subject for many disabled people. Okay, and a lot of people see their disability as an aspect of their identity, and we're going to talk about that in a lot of depth in the coming moments. So I'm going to play a short video. As a warning, those subtitles that are in it are provided by YouTube, so we know that they're not always perfect. And if you have trouble viewing the embedded video, I've also popped the link down below as well, so you can take a look at that on your own time. So I'm just going to hit play.
We need to talk about disability. You might hear people say that disability is caused by barriers in society. But what does that actually mean? Well, think about this. If someone who uses a wheelchair can't get into a building because of some steps, is the barrier caused by the person using a wheelchair or by the design of the building? If a blind person can't read the timetable for a train, what's stopping them from getting the information they need? If a child with learning difficulties is struggling in class, is it the child's responsibility to learn in the way they are taught, or the teacher's responsibility to teach in the way that the child can understand? For years, society has viewed disability as a problem that belongs to the disabled person and said that we should focus on fixing that person's impairment.
The social model of disability says that disability results from the way society is organised, rather than by a person's impairment or difference.
There is no right or wrong way to be. We are all different. We are all unique, diverse individuals.
We need to remove the barriers that stop disabled people from participating in society fully, on an equal basis with everyone else. We need to design buildings so that everyone can access them.
We need to ensure information is accessible to everyone so we can all participate in public life.
And we need to ensure that every child has the opportunity to learn and grow into the best person they can be.
When barriers are removed, disabled people can and will be equal in society,
with control over their own lives.
Not to mention all the other groups who benefit from a more inclusive and accessible society.
It's time to talk about disability differently. It's time to build our places and spaces differently. It's time to change attitudes and realise that we are all different and unique, and that an inclusive society is a better society for everyone.
So when we talk about the social model of disability, there are going to be people who say that it's not perfect, and that's because it's not. But the reason that we do is because it was a model that came from the disabled community. But with any growing discourse, there's room for change. And as we grow and as we develop and as we listen to people, there's room for change. But the simplest way of thinking about that social model is that disability is the experience of barriers. So while the medical model of disability looks at the physical impairment and how we can cure or fix that individual so that they can better fit into society. The social model takes a look at society and the way that those barriers exist and how we can remove those barriers and how those barriers disable the individual and keep them from engaging with society. And so this image really kind of encapsulates that, right? And when we take a look at it, you know, if we take a look at this cell that says equality and showing people trying to see over the fence, you know, everyone gets the same box, but that doesn't really help everyone because people are different and they have different capacity for seeing over the fence. We look at the vision of equity, which yes, helps everyone to see over the fence. But if we look at the amount of effort that it takes for each individual to get up those boxes, so the shortest person there has to climb up those boxes, which takes a huge amount more effort than the person who is already tall. Whereas liberation just gets rid of that fence, okay, and removes the barrier entirely. And that's what the social model is ultimately based on. The social model puts the onus on organizers and providers to consider the ways in which venues and festivals create barriers that might disable people, and to examine the ways in which these barriers can be removed. So for example, if someone is a wheelchair user or visually impaired or has a health condition, but they're able to access everything they need without any barriers arising around their disability, then they're not disabled. There's caveats there, but then they're not disabled within society because there are no barriers that are preventing them from access. So that moves us on to really what we're here, okay, to talk about language and the impact that language can have. The reason that language is so important is it has such a significant impact on the people around us. And we're going to talk about that in the next slide. But what I'm here to do, and what I do want to preface the next few slides about, is to say that we're not here to police you or to say you should and shouldn't, although it's kind of the phrasing I may use. It's to explain the fact that people are affected by the words that we use. And it's not about saying you can and can't or to police what you do, but a lot of disabilities are invisible. And there are people that you will encounter, and I can guarantee this, that there are people that you will encounter that do have an existing disability that you might not know about. And so if we can change the language that we use, it will impact people in a positive way. And it's also so much easier to change the language that we use across the board. So what I mean by that is saying, if we use the same language in our workplace and in our homes and in our social communities, it's easier to make that change everywhere rather than code switching. So using proper language at work and different language at home, right? You know, we know that if you're working for a venue or a festival, you're a representative of that organization. You want to be on your best behavior, but rather than code switching when you're in and out of work, it's just so much easier to make that change in your daily life. And I promise you that it's going to impact someone that you know. So there was a survey done by a charity called Leonard Cheshire of more than 2,400 disabled and non-disabled adults. And they looked at the fears about saying the wrong thing and also the way that people were impacted by different language as well. And the thing I liked about the survey was that it did look at both perceptions of both disabled and non-disabled people. So if we look at these figures, So over 1 in 5 disabled Brits say that they have experienced outdated terms to describe them from non-disabled strangers in a public place. So this is looking at in a venue, at a festival, and this has a knock-on effect on the way that they feel. Okay, nearly half, so at 46% of all disabled Brits feel regularly ignored or overlooked by non-disabled people due to that widespread use of inappropriate or demeaning language. So again, this language has a real impact on people as well. 14.1 million disabled people, and that's 73% of them, say that more needs to be done for non-disabled people to understand that their words cause offense. Okay, we know that words have power. And then we switch over and we look at 2 in 5 non-disabled people surveyed stated that they would be more likely to interact with disabled people if they knew the correct words to use. So this tells us that people are reticent to interact with disabled people because they are afraid of using the wrong language, which means that we have good intentions and, you know, they want to interact, but there's a fear there, there's a barrier, so to speak. And almost a third of non-disabled people are worried about saying the wrong thing when talking to disabled people. So fears about saying the wrong thing has created unnecessary barriers between disabled and non-disabled people. This really outlines the impact that language can have, as well as the desire that non-disabled people have to learn and to engage with people in a respectful and in a meaningful way, which is, I'm assuming, why many of you are here today.
Dominique, just
Yes.
really quick one. The speaker bar on your Zoom is covering just the top bit of the presentation. I'm not sure if there's a better place
This
that
one.
it could be moved to.
Is it gone?
Yes, got
Amazing.
it.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Love us some tech. Okay. So we know that language is nuanced, and I'm going to start with the big one that comes up so often. The word disabled. A lot of people ask this, can I say disabled? Is disabled rude to say? Is being disabled a bad thing? The majority of user groups in the UK are happy with the word disabled. There are some notable exceptions. Okay, so deafness and the cultural model of deafness is a departure. So many deaf people who are BSL users and even those who aren't do consider deafness a cultural difference and a language difference rather than a disability. There's also been recently a heightened level of this kind of discourse in the neurodivergent community as well, where it is becoming more of a cultural divide rather than people who identify with the word disabled. And we're going to talk about identity more in a minute. The next question is it a bad thing to be disabled? Is it rude? And so because of that, no. Is it a bad thing to be disabled? And no, not inherently. Disabled people do experience oppression, and so do many groups of people. Disabled is a word that can unite us in the barriers that we face in society. But disabled people can and do have exciting, fulfilling, and positive lives. Disabled joy is disabled pride. Okay. And the next question is, then what's the opposite of disabled? Is that enabled? You know, if we look at a dictionary, non-disabled is currently the more generally accepted term that fits within that social model. People will go on their own journey with this phrasing, okay? And their emotions will vary and their feelings about their identity with the word disabled are all valid. Some conditions like chronic pain are more internal than societally imposed barriers. So while we say that under the social model that society imposes the disability, that doesn't take away from the fact that their condition is disabling. Okay, very important to state that. We can dislike or be frustrated or resent our own disabilities, and that is valid. Okay, while we talk about pride and we talk about joy, we can still be angry at the cause of our own disability as well. It's also very useful to know and to remind ourselves that some disabilities are invisible, and some people don't define themselves as disabled either. Okay. Another thing to talk about is this difference between person-centered and identity-first speech. Okay, so person-centered is the phrasing a person with a disability, whereas identity-first is the phrasing I am disabled. The key is understanding the difference and letting the person you're with lead the discourse. Okay, so letting someone self-identify. You may notice more identity-first language within the disabled community and more person-first language in discussions about mental health, for example. Above all, it's always important to listen and respect the person and use the words that they want to use and that they want you to use. Okay. Most historically marginalized groups will end up using person-first language. As an example, and this is something that kind of resonates with a lot of people, you would always say, you know, she is a lesbian versus a person with homosexuality. So this is something that always kind of stuck with me personally, or families affected by homosexuality. And the same thing goes for disabilities. So, you know, disabled person versus family affected by disability. It really sticks wrong in the mouth. It's just important, as always, to remember again that there's no discussion about me without me. So don't forget to involve that person in the conversation. How do they prefer to be addressed? What language are they using? Is it okay for you to adopt similar language, right? We also have to remember our context. So situation-specific and neutral language. If you are talking to a person, to a customer, to an individual, or talking about someone, so for example, picking them out in a crowd, there's really no need to try to refer to their disability or to define them by it. And of course, you would use their name if you know it, right? But in a planning meeting, sometimes we do talk about user groups. So it might be wheelchair users, it might be deaf people. So think about the context of the words that you're using. When we talk about neutral language, we want to make sure that we keep our language factual versus emotive. So that prevents opinion and emotion. So for example, using words like suffering from is very emotive and it makes you feel things. And it's also putting feelings on someone else. We don't know if they're suffering. That's not up to us to decide, versus a diagnosis of, which is factual. And then finally, that last point is really, really key. So focus on access need. So in direct customer service, we always encourage people to focus on the access need rather than the condition or disability. So there's very rarely a time where we would ever ask someone their diagnosis. What we would do is say, do you have any access needs? And what those access needs might be, because that's the only thing that's actually important in delivering that service. We, again, always lead from the person, keep the social model in mind, and if you're unsure, it's always better to ask the individual rather than making any assumptions. Okay. Again, just another visual, because we love to see it. We use, this is that visual of someone who is disabled by barriers versus non-disabled, or that converse term, enabled. Barriers versus non-disabled. Barriers versus a lack of barriers. Right. So, getting into the specifics about the words and language, and actually before I do this, I forgot to mention, in the discussion of language, we will be using words and phrases that may be triggering for some people who have lived experience. Some of these words have been used to bully or to oppress, and may cause an emotional response. So if this is relevant to you, please feel free to take a break, to opt out, to turn your camera off if it's on. But it is really important that we will address these issues head on. We're just going to do this for the next 2 slides. Okay. So specifics in terms of terminology, right? We've already talked about using the phrasing disabled person or disabled people. What we are avoiding are these terms on the right. So handicapped, we don't use anymore. Any of the following words. We do use non-disabled. We don't use the word normal. There is no biological function for normal, okay? And what that does is it causes an othering, right? And it causes that oppressional vibe, and causes people to feel different or other. If someone has a disability or a condition, they have that condition. I have ADHD. I don't suffer from it. I'm not a victim of it. It is not ever someone's position to decide whether or not how we are responding to our disability. We simply have it. You know, we would say a learning disabled person, or if they have learning difficulties, none of those that are on the right. Again, for mental health, poor mental health or mental ill health, and avoiding all of the terms that are on the right as well. The next slide, again, deaf and hard of hearing. We will say blind, visually impaired, or partially sighted. Wheelchair user. This is a phrase that you want to adopt for anyone who is using a wheelchair. It's really important. We want to avoid wheelchair bound. This is quite a big one for people who do use a wheelchair. A wheelchair is often something that provides freedom and access for people rather than keeping them bound, which is a term that evokes feelings of restriction, and it's actually the opposite. When we talk about facilities, so toilets, ramps, parking, we always want to refer to it as accessible rather than disabled. So we see signs for disabled parking. But if you think about it and you think about the grammar that surrounds that, is that toilet disabled? No, it's accessible, right? Is the parking disabled? It's accessible. And actually, if we think about it a little bit further, the imagery that we get in our mind when we think about that is that it would mean that the toilet is broken. And if we think about that further, that means that disabled means broken. It's all wrong. So we have to think about facilities in terms of accessible. So accessible toilet, accessible parking. It's a major bugbear for a bunch of us. And I suddenly realized we've got that twice on there, but you know what? I'll keep it because it's doubly important. All right. So we have looked at what to say, but it's also really important to remember the most important part, and that's how to say it. Okay. It's always great to have the tools, but we need to learn how to use them. So what I'm about to say is going to seem really obvious to some of you. And you're going to look at me and think, why are you telling me this? This is obvious. Why are we doing this? And why do I have to state this to a room full of, adult people? But these are some of the most frequently identified sources of frustration and discrimination by disabled people. And so that's why we have to say this. And this is what will be partially informing a course in the future that we're going to be doing for security teams as well. So first off, speak directly to the customer, the individual, the disabled person, and not their personal assistant. So this happens again more than you would think, that people will often turn to the non-disabled person and communicate with them rather than the person who is disabled. Talk to the person you want to communicate with. That simple. Ask and don't assume. So never, ever, ever grab someone's mobility aid. So whether that's a wheelchair or any other mobility aid at all, always ask them first, would you like assistance? Can I get that door for you? Do you need a bit of help? Yes or no, it's up to them, depending on whether or not they feel like they would like help. But we never assume, we never grab hold of someone's wheelchair or mobility device. Be aware of what you say to others in earshot. This is here because we have very distinct examples of it happening. There was someone who got onto a radio and said, I have to deal with this person in a wheelchair. It might not seem like a big deal to you, but as a wheelchair user, that person had to listen to themselves being spoke about that way. And no one wants to feel a burden, okay? No one wants to feel like they have to be dealt with. They are a person there, they are a paying customer. The value of disability spending is massive. And we talk about that in our training as well. And their participation is just as valid as someone who is not disabled. And yeah, people often seem to disregard or forget that they're listening. It's really quite shocking. And then finally, navigating frustration with compassion. Sometimes what is communicated in ticketing or throughout the booking process or through third parties is not what happens in the venue. And we get this and we know. However, a lot of things have happened to allow a disabled person to get to that venue, and they reach there and they find that, there aren't accessible toilets, or, the venue is accessible except for 10 steps to get in, whatever that is, or their ticket was meant to be accessible, but it's not. There are a lot of things that happen. And that leads to a huge amount of frustration. And we're not expecting for you to be able to solve all those problems. What we are hoping is that you help to navigate that frustration with compassion, with understanding that they've gone through a huge amount of energy to get there. If you were to reach a venue and found out that it didn't have a toilet, how would you enjoy that gig? If you got there and you found that you couldn't actually get through the doors, just try to flip the script for yourself and see how you would be impacted in that way. And a lot of people take a huge amount of emotional and physical energy just in getting there. So that's why the frustration and the level of response that they may have might seem higher than you would expect. But we just ask for compassion in that moment and take a moment to think, okay, let me empathize with this. Just because it's not my job and it's not my fault, my responsibility, what can we do? And how can we communicate this? Okay. Okay, useful phrases. Here's some do's and don'ts. So again, do ask, do you have any access requirements? What are your access requirements? Nice and simple, right? And again, that's what we're avoiding, are asking any personal, any intrusive, any questions about their medical diagnoses. Unless it's a matter of health and safety, which is very, very rare, and the individual will know. Okay, so we have to trust them on that. It's largely irrelevant, you know, unless you're talking about a recruitment situation, in which case you will pass them on to occupational health. We do want to use the phrase accessible, again, to refer to facilities. We don't make assumptions. There's a lot of assumptions here. It's really hard to fit it into just this many. But the most important ones are, don't assume if or how far someone can mobilize. Don't assume what someone can or can't do. Don't assume that a show or an event is suitable or unsuitable for someone. Those aren't choices you have to make. Take it off your list. Do speak comfortably about mobility aids, and remember that there are more solutions than just wheelchairs. Also remember that just because someone is using a wheelchair, it doesn't mean that they can't stand or walk for short distances. It may mean that using a wheelchair gives them a huge amount of freedom and reduces the amount of energy it takes them to get around. Okay. Don't assume that because you can't see a disability, it doesn't exist and it's not valid. There are a huge number of invisible disabilities, and they all have their own toll as well. We've only touched very, very briefly on language, on communication, on disability in general. There is a huge amount more to be learned. Okay, there's not much you can do in just an hour and still have time for questions as well. So we offer a ton more of training, and we're also developing more courses over the course of this year. So disability, equality, and customer service does cover more of what we've done today and more on top. Plus, it's a lot more interactive. I don't like hearing myself talk for this long. Find it quite excruciating. We offer open sessions for that. So what I mean by that is we do offer sessions for larger teams. So if you have a team of 10 to 20 and you want your own session, that's great. But if you're just one person or a small team of 5 or under, you can sign up to those on Eventbrite. If you've attended today's session, you want to get yourself 25% off between now and the end of April, you can use Live Talk 24, and that promo code on Eventbrite will get you 25% off, right? We also do accessible design and planning, which is a brand new shiny course that'll be available from mid-February, that helps venues and festivals understand how to make it more accessible. Okay, it's a bit of a how-to. We do creating an accessible workplace culture. This is talking about recruitment, understanding reasonable adjustments, understanding how to interact with disabled employees. We talk about social model approaches to neurodiversity and mental health, which is really exciting for both employees and for employers as well. And then non-visible disability training also. And I did mention briefly earlier, we're doing another, there's going to be a very short component for security training that's going to be coming out spring-summer of this year as well. If you have any questions for me, if you want to get in touch about training, the email is there as well. That's training@attitudeseverything.org. I am going to stop my presentation now and stop sharing, stop, and see if we have some time for questions. We do. Gabby, if you want to go through the chat and see if we can.
Thanks, Dominique. That was brilliant. Thank you so much. And we're having lots of positivity in the chat. I haven't seen any direct questions yet. So anyone who would like to ask a question, please do put your hand up or pop one in the chat and I can read that out. But no, that was really useful. I certainly learned a lot, and it's great to see that everyone has stuck around. We've had over 120 people throughout taking notes. I've seen lots of people taking notes here, which is brilliant. So yeah, does anyone have a question for Dominique? Chrissy's asked, will the presentation be shared after the call? Dominique, is that possible?
Yeah, I can absolutely do that. If I can share it with you, Gabby, and you can send it out, is that cool?
Perfect.
Right. Got a question from Bryce.
Yeah, hello, guy. Hello there. So I just say thank you so much for this. This is just incredible. I'm disabled myself, and I've got autism. I'm a neurodiverse person, and I also work within like the live industry, like doing like events and stuff like that, trying to get as accessible as possible, myself and to help people. I think what I'd like to maybe like to ask you, and I think this was not covered, is about the Equality Act 2010 and on and actual obligations on venues, ticketing companies, and various different and people that basically that they're required to do by law to actually to make these adjustments, to make these to really to be careful about what we're saying, because unfortunately in my experience is that whenever I feel faced indirect discrimination or direct discrimination or victimization or that at the hands of like going to events or going to like music venues or going to even just venues in general and trying to assert my rights as a disabled person, it's been very excruciatingly difficult, and it's extremely difficult to actually assert my rights. Because if I wanted to get like a solicitor to really to take a case of discrimination to like the Scottish courts, I have to fork out at least a minimum of £50,000 to take an action to assert my rights, which is unbelievably expensive and definitely out of my price range. So I'm just wanted to like if you could be able to touch upon more about the Equality Act 2010 and about venue and promoter and basic obligations, because I think that's super important to actually to really ring home to us that we actually not just don't have a moral and ethical obligation, we have a legal obligation, which I think that we need to really talk about. And I think nobody really understands that, and I don't think we take it very seriously sometimes, some venues, but I think some venues do, and I'm very pleased to see that. But I just want to say thank you very much for allowing me the privilege to speak. I really appreciate it, and thank you so much. And I just want to say this is just so hopeful to be in a call with over 120 people who have stayed on to listen, and I think that just goes to show that we've got hope and we've got positivity in the room, and I just want to say thank you so much to this being organised. I really just love you all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Bryce. You raise a really, really valid point. You know, we are protected from discrimination by the Equality Act of 2010. You're absolutely bang on there. It is a challenging thing. And I can't quite sugarcoat it there, but what we can do, and this is something that I'm trying to do in the background, is find better resources for people. So if anybody knows any, let me know, reach out to me. But in the meantime, what we are working on is creating this community, and this is why it's so exciting to see so many people here from venues, from events, and part of what, it sounds like a plug, I don't mean it to be a plug, but we're all quite excited by what we're doing. And with the point of the Charter of Best Practice is to create that list of venues and festivals who are making an active push to make it better. And a lot of this is coming from a community and grassroots level where people are expecting venues and festivals to be held accountable. And there's an level of accountability now that is raising from those communities. And I think that's what we're really starting to see. I know that doesn't really answer the question, but these are trends that I am seeing.
Yeah, it does answer my question. I think that one of the things which I think has been raised in the chat just now, I think this is just super important, that I think that is actually having like the complaints processes is so important, actually, but actually being trauma informed and also being like dealt with, because I think that right now when we're trying to assert our rights and trying to make like representations of how we're being treated, is that people don't realize. And I think that another thing which goes beyond like what's been in the chat, goes beyond like the venues, is actually the security, the supply chain, the people, the catering companies, all these small intricate parts which come into making venues. I think that work is, I don't think that people realize it's all connected, all interconnected, and they all have a legal obligation to provide an accessible customer service line to be able to do that. And it's not just being like an email address, it's more like a phone number or a direct message, and actually being able to like work with the communication channel that's accessible to the disabled like participant. Because I think we don't really get to see that. We get to see people all go to our corporate email, or go to this email address, or go to this and do that. It's like it has to go through like formalized channels which are so difficult and so inaccessible. Sorry for taking up time in this space.
No, appreciate it. And this is why we really want to see more of that best practice, so we can see what people are doing. And the more we shout about it, it's going to hold other venues and other companies to account, if that makes sense, and using that kind of element of peer pressure, if nothing else.
We've got another question in the chat from Sammy. How is it best to respond to a disabled customer that's angry due to unfortunately being sold out of accessible tickets?
So we talk about this in a lot more depth in the training that we do. And you know, we talk about the volume of people that are you know, in terms of percentage of people that access venues and access events, and ways that you can increase those numbers first off. And then it's also a matter of finding proactive ways to do that. And a lot of that comes down to the communication that we have, making sure that when you are selling those tickets, that you are communicating what those tickets do. So for example, not everyone is going to need viewing platform access, right? Some people will need accessible tickets, but what do they actually need? Is it because they need a more sensory aware environment? Is it because they have a mobility aid that isn't necessarily a wheelchair? Do you have different space for that? What are ways that you can be a little bit more flexible with your space to improve that and to increase that? And then if you're doing everything that is possible, then when you speak to someone, you can say, these are all the things and measures that we're taking. And again, you can come from that compassionate angle and say, these are the things. Also, a number of venues are allowing people to sign up to access groups within the venue, and they can have more direct communications with that in terms of releases, to give them better access. And taking that time to communicate with people is alarmingly, satiating is not the right word, but it will help people understand. And when people understand, they calm.
Thanks, Dominique. We've had a question from Liz. What are your thoughts on the use of some of these terms generally rather than specifically about disabled people? For example, describing a busy day in the office as it has been mental or it has been crazy.
Yeah, I also do mental health first aid training, and we talk about this a lot. I would like to eradicate these words and taking a look at the language you use. And again, just think about what you're trying to say. So rather than saying, you know, it's been crazy, it's been busy. And I know that it's not as sexy or fun to describe it that way, but think about what you're saying. You know, people say, oh, the weather's been bipolar, I've heard. Well, no, the weather's been changeable. And I get that it's not as descriptive as you want it, but taking a minute to take a look at the language you use is really important. Absolutely. Really key point.
Great, thank you. We've got a question from Hannah. Hannah said, I work at a venue and the biggest complaint we get is that customers can't talk to a person before or after the event. I know we live in a digital world, but I think all venues/ticketing services should have a dedicated phone line for customers to use, or at least have a callback system. Kind of what are your thoughts on that?
Yes. Yeah, that's my thoughts. Absolutely, 1000%. The number of people who actually need to speak to someone before to find out what the access is like and whether or not they can attend that venue is actually it's 75%. It's massive. So it is really important.
Yeah, lots of really positive messages kind of saying
yeah.
People saying what they've done at their venues. We've got one question from Ross Edwards. How's it best to manage situations where some promoters or artists do not want to make certain adjustments to their performance or show?
Well, the reasonable adjustments fall under the umbrella of discrimination. And then again, this is something that we talk about in our training in more depth. And so this is something that we're starting to see more frequently. The number of people using closed captions or subtitles in their performances is, it makes my heart happy. The same thing with BSL performers. And also, can I just say, it looks cool, and not having strobe lighting. And these are all reasonable adjustments. You know, personally, I would like to see people refusing gigs for that. I would like to see a place where artists can pick and choose the venues they go to based on the accessibility for the artists. We talk a lot about that. I am doing a talk next week with Jazz North about advocating for artists and artist riders. So really important to consider that end of it as well.
Perfect. I think that's all the questions that I've seen in the chat. If I've missed anyone, I'm really sorry. Please do put your hand up if I've not spotted it in the chat. The recording of this will be available tomorrow on the live website from about midday. I've just got to upload it onto YouTube and do all that technical stuff. But yes, it will be up and available to watch from tomorrow lunchtime. Sabina.
It's not so much a question as much as a bit of a shameless plug, but just to say that we're doing a live streamed event with Drake Music on the 31st of January. The idea of this event is it's meant to be showcasing to other members of the industry how to run an event that is accessible and friendly and welcoming, not just from a front of house perspective, but from the artist perspective as well. So we've done a lot of work with their performers to work out how we can be a much more friendly and open venue. I'm happy to put the link in the chat, but just a bit of a shameless plug to say we're doing something that might tie in with a lot of the questions. And there'll be Drake Music who will be doing lots of presentations about how to work within your venue and what adjustments can be made and what things to consider. And they'll touch on a lot of what you spoke about, Dominique, but I just wanted to put that out there as something that might be of interest for some of the people in this group.
Thanks, Sabina. We've got one more question actually, and then we're probably just about out of time. It's a question on companions. companions. If an accessible customer can't place a booking due to certain barriers in place, is it okay to ask them to ask their companion to do this for them?
Absolutely. We talk a lot about what we use the phrase PA or personal assistant, but companions, absolutely. This is the crux of the issue, is that there are a number of things that PAs can support a disabled person with, all the way from booking to attendance to, you know, to departure. That's the great thing, and that's why PA tickets are so vital to part of the experience. 100%.
Perfect. Great. I think that's it. Anyone else got any questions before we head off? No? Excellent. Well, thank you so much, everyone. It's been a really great hour, and thank you, Dominique. That was such a brilliant session. I'm sure everyone agrees. And this, as I said, this is all going to be available on the live website from tomorrow. But yes, thank you so much. Please keep an eye out for our future live talk sessions. They're monthly, free to all. Please share them around. And yeah, we'll carry on doing good work across our industry, because I feel like there's been some really good progression over the last year. So thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Bryce.
How